Welcome back. Let's now focus to the drought situation that has been here in this country for the last few months. According to numbers, in December of last year, 2016, about 1.3 million people were food insecure. That number has risen. It has indeed doubled to 2.7 in the month of February, and that is what we seek to talk about this evening. My guests are here. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I have with me Nancy Githaiga from the Worldwide Fund, WWF Kenya chapter. We have Siddharth Chatterjee, the United Nations Resident Coordinator for Kenya. We have Kevin Mugenya, the Food Assistance Manager, World Vision, and James Odoro, the Chief Executive of the National Drought Management Authority. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We want us to discuss about the situation right here in Kenya from where all of you sit and talk about how Kenya allowed herself to get into this and where the country goes from here. And could this have been avoided, not in terms of the drought situation, but how it was dealt with? Now, a lot has been said. The numbers have been given, 2.7. Let me start with you, Kevin. 2.7 million Kenyans facing starvation. I don't know if that is correct.
I can confirm.
How bad is that situation?
Thank you again for the invitation. I can confirm the number is 2.7, having done a short-range assessment together with the NDMA.
All right.
The issue is 2.7 as of the time we were collecting the data, but the situation is getting worse. And so those are the ones in direct need of food assistance within the 23 counties. But there's another, if you read the report, there's another 300,000 in non-ASAL, arid and semi-arid areas.
All right.
These are typical areas where you don't expect drought. And so it's getting worse, and very slowly it will bite into the urban areas. So currently the face of the drought seems to be arid and semi-arid, but I think very soon in urban areas we'll begin to feel the trickle-down effect in terms of the food prices.
Mr. CEO, the other day the president declared it a national disaster. Some people have been asking, what took the government so long?
It did not take the government long. You know, everything has to be done at the right time.
All right.
We just completed the comprehensive assessment, interagency, done by interagency, multi-sectoral and multi-agency, and we got the number my colleagues is talking about, the 2.7 million in ASALs and 300,000 in non-ASALs. And remember from last year, the government has been intervening, the national government supporting the county government. We had very elaborate plans. By November last year, we had prepared a plan, and phase one was from November, December, and January this year, 5.4 billion, which the government provided. Then phase two starts February, March, and April this year. That time we had budgeted 9 billion Kenya shillings, but now we have revised to 11 billion. Then phase three from May, June, and July.
All right.
So looking at all that, the government looked ahead and saw where we are, what we have done, and the problem is coming. So what His Excellency did, he did not have to wait until we are in the red. He looked ahead and said, while the situation is being contained now, we need also to contain it as we go along. Then he was calling on the other stakeholders and the partners and everybody else to come,
join hands
and then ensure the situation is contained.
So the question that I have is, if all these plans have been in place, why has this number been rising after every few months?
The number rises as the situation changes. You know, the drought has got stages. It comes slowly. It creeps in slowly. For example, we say sometimes things are normal. We look at so many indicators. Sometimes the environmental indicators have changed. They are not what they are, and we say that is alert stage.
All right.
Sometimes when the environmental indicators have changed and also the production, the crops have failed and the livestock is also failing,
all right,
then we say it is alert.
All right.
And when all these things have now gone out of their normal ranges, then we say it's alarm. So it changes slowly, and therefore it cannot happen at once that you have a number. It affects even the counties. It started from the coast, it moved to some northeastern,
right,
continue that. So it's creeping and spread slowly, and that's why it's not one of the number keep on changing as the situation worsens.
So the president asking both international and local organizations to come on board. So what is the view of the United Nations from where you stand?
Well, first of all, thank you for this invite. But I should actually start by complimenting the Kenyan government for the forward-looking action that it took. Actually, an interministerial steering committee had already been constituted under the Chief of Staff, Mr. Joseph Kinwa. last year in September. So last year in September, we were looking at a figure, by about November, we were looking at a figure of about 1.3 million people affected. And let me tell you, I think the government was doing outstanding work, not only in the response that it was doing, undertaking with the counties, but also with the other partners, such as the UN family, the Kenya Red Cross and others. But, you know, the drought is something that you can't switch off a light and then, you know, it goes down. It has just, you know, it has deteriorated quite significantly. And the deterioration over the last 2 to 3 months has been quite significant. So now, while we're looking at about 3 million people affected, by April, with the current, you know, failure of the short rains, with the predictions that the Kenya Meteorological Department has given us, we're looking at 4 million people by April. Right. So essentially what the United Nations family is doing with the government, based on an appeal that the president has now declared a national emergency, we ourselves will be putting out a flash appeal for about 10 billion Kenya shillings out there. Right. The Kenya Red Cross has an appeal, for example, for about 1 billion Kenya shillings out there. So, you know, we are collectively looking at how best to support this, because this can't be done by any single institution alone.
Yes, we'll talk about the solutions. Nancy, let's talk about where this all starts. Is this something that, you know, the authorities could have predicted? How did we get here as a country?
Thank you, Ben. I think this is not a situation which is finding us, you know, by surprise.
That's right.
All the way from last year, we knew that 2017 we were going to have a drought. We actually knew this even towards the end of last year. And as my colleagues are saying, the preparations already began. Whether the preparations were adequate is something that probably can be discussed, but this is not something that is catching us actually by surprise. And over the years, I think what we are seeing is the droughts are becoming more frequent. Whereas we would talk of 10 years, every 10 years, or every 5 years, now it almost looks like every 2 years. You know, we have a flood, we have a drought. We have a flood, we have a drought. And certainly even in 2017, we won't have sufficient rains. So if August comes and we have drought, shall we be saying it is actually catching us by surprise? No, I think it's our planning that actually needs to be upped.
All right.
Yeah.
What are the causes of drought from a climate change kind of perspective? Is all this as a result of climate change?
Yeah, and I would say maybe climate change from an anthropological situation where we are doing a lot actually to cause what we are seeing. Of course, what we are doing and what others have done in the past in terms of greenhouse gases. This, of course, is making it worse, and it is going to get worse. There is, of course, climate variability, like when we have rains, short rains and long rains that are not actually following the sequence or the patterns that were. But what we are facing now is climate change. And I think now, more than before, as I've said, the frequencies are going to increase. The extreme events are actually going to increase. Why? Because of the greenhouse gases, because of the way we are actually dealing with our environment, whether it is through deforestation, whether it is through, you know, pollution. This is going to increase. So it has the human face to it, but of course, there are other things that are also beyond us.
All right, let me pick up from your point about planning, how we plan as a country. And Kevin, could this have been avoided? Not the drought, but how the situation of food insecurity in this country by planning better. What do you think about this?
I think, number one, we are where we are, not because of lack of rain. I think if the next 3 months we have rain continuously, we'll end up with another disaster. And so for me, the answer is not in having adequate rainfall, because climate change, we've not been told last year or 2 years ago. It's something that is here with us to stay. And so for me, is how we begin to understand and approach food security as a country. And when you begin to look at addressing food security, all the way from availability, accessibility, how it is utilized, and how do you ensure that the market is sustainable, stable enough to ensure continuity. And so you begin to see how Kenya is approaching addressing food security, right from, and I'll give you an example. We have a Maputo Declaration that was signed in 2003, which gives a direction that at least 10% of our national budget should be geared towards what? Food, agriculture. Currently, in 2015-2016 budget, we only had, I think, 2.3%. 2016 coming to 2017, I think we had less than 5%. So already we are starting from a problem in terms of allocation of resources. But my suggestion is not that we throw money to a problem. even if you throw 30 billion, and I think that's the frustration most Kenyans are getting, is that if you had these elaborate plans in September, setting aside 7 billion, 10 billion, 30 billion, what really is the issue? Money can only solve as much, but I think we need to put in place very deliberate intention to get our food security strategy right.
All right.
We keep looking at it from a perspective where a majority of the roles in terms of agriculture has been devolved to the county level. And so what's the role of the county? And I think the current situation we are facing should not be looked at from the perspective of lack of rain alone. I think we are looking at layers of issues, looking at a devolved system of government that has devolved resources, but looking at how do we strengthen county systems to better deliver services. We are looking at an year where we are having, of course, political connotations. So what does it mean for political leaders to set aside 1 billion and distribute resources? Is that in response to the human dignity of responding to the issue, or are we using it as a political gimmick? So for me, we'd really have to take a few steps behind and look at where do we put our resources? Is it really where the local mwananchi wants in terms of addressing food security?
Mr. CEO, he says it is not just a lack of rainfall. Do you think the government has rather reacted to these things rather than acting and planning adequately?
I think we are dealing with two issues here. One is strictly how do you respond to a drought situation when it's there, like what we have currently. And therefore you need like early warning information, you need to know that it's coming, and you need to plan for it, all those. And this is why I'm saying the whole thing started last year when the long rains failed, and the interventions were going on, and the situation is worsening. Then we also have to upscale our interventions. I mentioned phase 1, the amount. Phase 2, which shows that we need to do more. Phase 3, if the rains fail, then we'll have to do more. That's one side. You deal with it as it happens, and you have plans, proper plans to deal with it. We are doing now. The second bit of it, which has also been mentioned, is the long term. You do something now so that in the next 5 years or 10 years or so, when drought is there, because droughts will always be there, this is a natural phenomenon, then the impact are minimized. In that regard, right now, the government has got an elaborate strategy. We call it Ending Drought Emergency Strategy, part of Vision 2030, part of MTP2, and it's going to MTP3. It was launched in 2015, signed by the county government representative, signed by the national government, and also the donor representative. And it's the strategy that guides on what we should do for the next 10 years if we don't want to be in this situation. And it's really elaborate. Maybe I'll talk about it later.
What lessons could you say the government has learned from this drought situation that keep occurring after every few years? What are the key lessons would you say that you've learned?
I think the key lesson number one is that when you are responding to drought like now we are responding, it's like you are putting off fire, and you are not putting off dealing with the cause of fire. So the government has learned that we need long-term sustainable development to end this problem, and that's why we have that strategy. Another thing the government has learned, and not only the government, is that we need set-aside funds so that when the drought starts, then we can move faster. Right now, the government has really moved very fast, but I know we can move faster. And in this regard, we are in the process of actually, the National Drought Management Authority Act has established a fund, Drought Emergency Fund. Now we are in the process of preparing regulations for it so that it can start operating. Once we have the funds, set-aside funds, multi-donor basket contributed by everybody, our speed will be faster than maybe what it is
I want
now.
us to talk about how to mitigate this immediately, right now, what the people that are facing starvation or are not food secure, and then talk about the long term. Let me start with this. Is there a need? In 2011, there was another drought described as maybe the worst in 50 years in the Horn of Africa. And there was, Kenyans came together. It was called the Kenyans for Kenya Initiative, contributed to help at that time, and also to enhance food security in the long term. Do you think there's need for another Kenyans for Kenya initiative?
Absolutely. I think this is a humanitarian imperative. All hands need to come on board. The difference between 2011 and now, I used to be in the Red Cross in Geneva. You know, I think the red light came on sometime only in May. This time, the government actually brought on all actors together last year as early as September. So I think there was a perspective of this, but the suddenness of the onset of this drought has, particularly because it's the entire region which is affected. Ben, for me, Kenya perhaps is a story where the whole story of resilience can actually be demonstrated. To me, I really believe that Kenya can not just be a food-secure country, but can potentially be the food basket for the rest of Africa. It has everything going in favor of it in terms of the human capital, in terms of the land space that is available, and in terms of the technology. I mean, if a country like Israel can grow, grapes and produce, some of the finest quality of food products in an arid land, I think we are at a good place to do it. This experience is perhaps reinforcing us as partners to look at a few things. Number one is to look at the whole issue of resilience, to which the UN will work very closely with the government and civil society to make it happen. Number two, most importantly, is to look at not just the effects, the egregious effects of the drought and mitigate it, but over the next few years, what is it that we could do quickly to put in place those resilient mechanisms?
But so can this really, what you're saying, I want to pick up on your points that Kenya can be the food basket of the region. Can it really, because in like 6 of the counties at the coast, which have been some of the most affected, the production of maize, Kenya's staple food, has decreased 99%.
Yeah. Ben, I come from a country, India, and the Prime Minister of India recently visited Modi, and he comes from Gujarat. Gujarat used to be the same story of what you have in Marsabit and Mandera for endless years, famine, and millions of people used to die. In the 60s and 70s, the Green Revolution started in Gujarat. Right. Today, it's one of the bread baskets for the rest of the country. To me, the potential for Kenya is just massive. And only thing, in the 60s and 70s, we didn't have access to that kind of technology. Now we have the technology with which we can actually leapfrog the whole prospect of resilience. So let's look at this drought as an opportunity for affirmative action and change.
Kevin, the immediate, Kenyans for Kenya, is there a need for such today?
I think there is need for all hands to be on deck.
Exactly.
I know in terms of when you speak about Kenyans for Kenyans, majority of those who participated are probably asking more questions in terms of the humanitarian level of transparency. And I think that's a discussion that we can have in terms of what does it mean when Kenyans come together? How do you clearly articulate what resources went where?
Yes.
But at the moment, from a humanitarian perspective, on behalf of World Vision, I think all hands needs to be on deck. We can have another conversation in terms of how do we ensure the level of transparency in terms of utilization of resources. But of importance is that currently, most counties, which is not being brought out clearly, are actually doing something in terms of responding. I'll give you an example.
The county governments.
County governments.
Yeah.
I was in Turkana, and I think in Turkana East, the county government is one of the worst hit areas in Turkana, and they're doing a bit of food distribution there. World Vision, together with other institutions like South Fund, intervening in Turkana, West, South, and Central. And so for me, yes, Kenyans need to be on deck, but I think we need to acknowledge that there's a bit of support happening, so we need to call for more coordination.
All right.
If we do the mistake of going to 2009-2011, you'll find everyone goes to a county that has been highlighted, and I think my counterpart from NDMA can highlight this. You go to Marsabit or Moyale, and you find majority of the partners have been there. Food is being distributed all over until they have more than enough that it is actually being given to donkeys. It's embarrassing when coordination is not right. But at the moment, I think there's a bit of coordination happening. And how do we begin to strengthen that, especially the non-governmental organization to partner with government to achieve this?
Good points there. Nancy, the UN coordinator says that Kenya has a potential. Today, close to 3 million are not food secure. How do we ensure that we get to that promised land that he is talking about? What are the permanent solutions?
Thank you, Ben. What I see, of course, there is potential, and I think we receive more rain than other countries that are actually food secure. What we do with the rain is something else. What we'll do with the rain come April, May, and June, when we are expecting some rains, is also something that we shall be discussing probably about floods. But there is a possibility. When we talk about climate change, it comes with its positives and its negatives. In this country, it doesn't necessarily mean we shall have, less rainfall. But it means some places may receive more rainfall, while others may receive less. So we have an opportunity for these areas where probably we did not grow crops in the past, to start growing crops. There is that possibility. There are areas that were very cold, for instance, areas like Kinangop, when temperatures will go higher, then we can also grow maize in Kinangop, which we don't do today. So this will come, there are opportunities but it is the planning that actually needs to be done. We talk of community-based adaptation. How are communities going to adapt to this? How do we increase resilience, like he's saying? How do we reduce vulnerabilities? You've asked about Kenyans for Kenyans. Of course, dead people cannot wait for plants. People need food now. But then plans must actually be put in place.
All right.
We have what we call the National Action Plan for Climate Change, a good document, but we need to move it, beyond being a good document to actually implementing it. Yeah.
All right. Kevin,
Allow me to add on the how do we get into Kenya being a breadbasket.
Right.
And I think if you take the discussion to the county at the moment in terms of what is their comparative advantage in terms of agriculture, you'll begin to find that each county is trying to do maize, beans, everything, mention it. But now when they produce it, there's no access to the market. And I think for me, if we step back and under the leadership of the Ministry of Agriculture and NDMA, of course, development partners, is to ask ourselves as a country, where do you want to be in the next 10 years in terms of the agricultural sector? Not leave the money aside in terms of just where do we best do maize? Where would we do beans? Where would we do this kind of production? And I think for me, we'll begin to look at our land tenure system, look at the problem we have and the issues we have, and begin to invest our resources where there is comparative advantage.
Right.
At the moment, every county, every development partner, including non-governmental organization, are promoting at some point the wrong technology or the wrong crop in certain countries.
Right.
And so at some point, if we are not careful, we can actually be reinforcing the problem.
All right.
I'll just add here that agriculture is going to be crucial. Why? The Kenyans are seeing a youth bulge, a phenomenal youth bulge. Every year, 1 million new jobs is needed for the next 10 years. Agriculture can actually become the main stakeholder for also absorbing the number of youth. Because Kenya's population, which is 45 million now, will be 65 million by 2030 and 85 million by 2050. If we can start to engage young people and get them onto jobs, agriculture, smallholder farming is going to be the way to go. Way to make Kenya food secure, way to make Kenya prosperous, and that is how we want to industrialize the scale of agriculture throughout Kenya.
All right. Is there a need for an agricultural revolution, or is it that what you're describing to cater for the climate change?
Everything. I think we need a revolution, like the Green Revolution of India. Perhaps that is something that we need now for Kenya. And once we get that ball rolling, believe me, young people will actually find it more attractive to stay in their homes and in their villages because there's an opportunity to not only earn an income, but to become food secure. And then you'll find less pressure on your urban hubs. So I think it may be a good time to actually look at this as an opportunity of revolutionizing the whole agricultural model for Kenya.
Yes, yes. They have a lot of great ideas. Does the government see these ideas?
Yes, yes. We are saying we have potential in the various parts of the country for food production. For example, in the high potential areas, we have not exhausted maize production potential with the good seed, with the fertilizer, with proper agronomic practices. We can still increase our maize production from the current about 40 million bags to even more.
All right.
Then we also have other areas, marginal agricultural areas, where we can still produce food, but we need a bit of technology, the seed, proper soil or water conservation, and others. Then we also have the irrigation potential, which we have not exhausted. So we are saying various parts of the country have got different potentials, and we have not exhausted that.
All right.
So with a bit of technology here and there and proper agronomic practices, we can still increase the production.
I want to get your final thoughts on this as we wind up. Our 30 minutes is over. Yeah. Nancy, will we get to a point where Kenya is not talking about 1.3, 2.7 million Kenyans facing starvation? Do you see that getting to that point anytime soon?
If we planned, we actually do not need to grow all our food. We don't need to be food sufficient. What we need to do is be food secure.
Exactly.
We need to plan our land, which we don't plan very well. That's why we shall be planting wheat in areas where wildlife should actually exist. So we do need that kind of planning, what we call maybe the spatial planning. So we need to have land, proper land uses, but we need to plan and grow what can be grown in the right places.
All right.
If this is done and we invest in it now, then we would be able to get there.
This planning, Kevin, who is mandated with making sure it is implemented?
Actually, at the moment, if you read the Constitution, different institutions have been given different mandates. If you just speak disaster, I think my colleague would talk about different institutions that have been given a mandate just to respond to disaster. The constitution devolves some functions to the county, so their mandate, they have to do their role, as opposed to keep saying the government is not doing the national government. So I think for me, the national government has its role in terms of policy development. The county has its role because the resources are being devolved. And now the Mwananchi is asking more, that I hear there is more money being brought to the county. How come I'm still starving? Right. So for me, I see a role of different partners. And non-governmental organizations, I think, need to begin to see how do they strengthen the current system that has been put. Of course, without the issues that we are struggling with in terms of governance. But I see a role for each partner. I see no competition, but I see comparative advantage based on your focus. As World Vision, our focus will still remain as child focus, and so our interventions will always aim towards ensuring that the child, whether we are doing food security, education in drought situation, ends up impacting the child in terms of the outcomes that we look at. So all partners need to be on deck in terms of planning.
Thank you. Sir, can the government of Kenya do this alone without international organizations?
I think, today we've come to a time and space where after Rio +20, it was clear that governments can't do it alone. It needs its partners. So you have your development partners, you need your civil society here, which are going to be crucial in advancing this. You need your private sector, which is going to be another major partner, because it is the private sector that can help to industrialize agriculture. So you need a right combination of empowering people to be able to do exactly that. And one final point, keep in mind, Sub-Saharan Africa loses $95 billion annually because of gender inequality. I think perhaps a good time to start really looking at this issue and getting more and more women and girls, allowing them to reach their full human potential and getting them into the labor force. That's what is going to change the situation for Kenya.
All right. A lot of planning, a lot of good strategies you've told us,
Yes.
Mr. CEO. In the immediate plan, we have told very many stories here on KTN News on our coverage of the drought, of so many Kenyans suffering. Do you, as a government, promise that this immediate suffering is going to end in the near future?
Certainly, certainly, because even now we are seeing a lot of difference. 2011, we are saying this drought strength maybe is equal to 2011, could even be worse.
All right.
At a time like this, we know the number of livestock that had died, we know the number of people that had been affected, and even the population has grown. So if you compare the 2.7 we are talking about in the ASAL, as a percentage of the total population, is much, much lower than what we had in 2011.
Right.
Even the impacts that are going on now compared to what we had in 2011. And this can be attributed first and foremost to the development that has gone on since the county governments came into place.
Right.
A lot of investments in this ending drought emergency that I'm talking about, and also support also from the other stakeholders.
Right.
So we are not yet there, but when I see where we are coming from, where we are, and we are comparing lessons learned with what used to happen, there are a lot of positive development.
Right.
So if we fast track what we are doing right now, and with the support of other stakeholders, and the country governments also playing their role, I'm convinced in maybe another 5 years or 7 years, drought will still be there, but the impact will definitely be minimized.
All right, thank you all so much. Hope we'll call you another day to discuss another more progressive account of what has been happening in terms of the drought situations in Kenya. Thank you so much. James Odor, Chief Executive of the National Drought Management Authority, Siddharth Chatterjee, United Nations Resident Coordinator to Kenya, and Kevin Mugenya, Food Assistance Manager for the World Vision, and Nancy Githaiga from the Worldwide Fund. Thank you so much for your time. Of course, it is a story we shall continue to cover here on KTN News in the way only we can here on Drought Diaries. Don't go